Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Pitchside Perspective Podcast. I'm your host Stuart Sharples, and joining me as always is Mr. Jack Collazar. This week we're talking captains, Premier League captains, and what separates the average from the great. Some might say a captain's legacy might live forever, and that during their time in charge, the respect they get grows little by little. Of course, it's the manager who's in charge of the team, but it's the captain that pieces together the master plan. It's the captain that makes sure the team doesn't look back in anger and that they stay focused week after week to make sure they don't slide away. So at the end of the season, they're reeling in a champagne supernova. So let's roll with it and get the episode started. Jack, how are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Feeling supersonic. Feeling
Love it.
Wonderwall. Ready for another good episode.
Ready for another good episode and huge news for any Oasis fans out there, of course. Oasis are back. Again, forget the World Cup. Let's focus on getting Oasis tickets for now.
Yeah, I've just put all my furniture, TV, everything on eBay, selling that, ready for some tickets.
Hey, we'll have to do an episode soon around music and football because the two go hand in hand together. And I think whether you're a Manchester fan, City or United, I just think if you're British, you're just a lover of Oasis generally, and just music in like the 90s, 2000s was really like side by side with the Premier League.
Yeah, and it's also a big part of the change rooms, right? You see it after every win, every trophy, singing, dancing in the change rooms. So yeah, like you say, it's always been a strong relationship between music and football.
I'll put you on the spot here. What used to be your song that you used to listen to as a kid before a game?
Before a game, didn't really, yeah, it wasn't really me, to be honest. Pre-game music and all that stuff.
I'll
Wasn't the
start calling
music
you
guy
Roy Keane
before.
over here.
Yeah, I was just sat trying not to get too nervous, I guess.
Well, for me, it was Eminem, "Lose Yourself," and I used to have my hood up, and I used to like have a little bop about me, and then manager would come in and say, "Yeah, you're on the bench," so that went out the window.
Brilliant.
But no, I mean, obviously, we're a couple of weeks now into the Premier League. Um, some surprising results in the last weekend. I mean, I didn't really see Chelsea winning 6-2. I mean, unbelievable result for them. And is this maybe the seed that they've planted to kick on now?
Maybe, yeah, I think we saw him winning the game. Just maybe a little bit surprised they scored six, but you know, I spoke about it a little bit on the last episode. When you have that many talented players, if it does click, it's going to be good when it does click.
Yeah, and obviously for anyone that plays fantasy out there, whether you captain or triple captain Haaland, I mean the hat trick over Ipswich. I mean Ipswich obviously going a goal up. It's almost the wrong thing to do going a goal up against City so early because you know then they're just going to bring the cavalry at you and just battle you for the next 80 minutes or so. But I think Ipswich they've been given right the short straw here, two hard games to start with, and maybe now they can start kicking on.
Yeah, depends which way. Maybe, yeah, like you say, get them out of the way, and then maybe some more realistic opportunities to get some points on the board coming up.
Oh, definitely. But today's episode, obviously, all about captains and the trivia question. I've kept it on theme. So if you're ready, I'll give you the question. So the question this week, there have been 17 captains who have won the Premier League. So it's quite a lot, but 17 captains. Obviously, some we'll talk about in the episode that might maybe trigger some clues or whatever. But there's a few banana skins that you might slip up on.
Okay. I think 17. I think my only confusion, I think I've got half a chance of getting somewhere close to 17. I think the difficulty is sometimes, throughout the season, there's more than one person wearing the captain's armband and being clear on who is the actual captain, right? That's
Correct,
where the
but
in-depth knowledge is going to have to come up.
exactly, and I have no doubt in your knowledge, mate. Uh,
Well, we'll find out.
we will. We'll come back at the end and reveal those answers. But before we do begin with the main bulk of the episode, it's time for Jack's 60-second EFL roundup.
Yeah, just a quick EFL roundup for everyone. So, starting off in League Two, friend of the podcast and season one guest Anthony Hayes is doing a great job as assistant manager. of Gillingham, who are in first place after a 0-0 draw with Fleetwood Town. At the wrong end of the table, Morecambe continue to struggle with 0 points so far this season. In League One, another Season 1 guest, John Marquis, led the line for his side Shrewsbury, who fell 1-0 to Huddersfield Town. Wrexham climbed up to fourth after an emphatic 3-0 win at home to Reading, and Birmingham are in fifth. It was goals galore at Abbey Stadium, where Cambridge United and Blackpool both found the back of the net 4 times. There was some local derby action in the Championship that saw Leeds United take the 3 points in the Yorkshire derby against Sheffield Wednesday, and the South Wales derby finished Swansea 1, Cardiff City 1. Sunderland took a 1-0 home win against Burnley to take them into first place, and another loss for Luton Town leaves them 23rd place with just 1 point from the first 3 games of the season. That is your EFL roundup for this week.
Love it. I'm loving the challenge you're putting on yourself as well to keep it all in 60 seconds. I kept an eye on the clock there and take my hat off to you. Lots of info there, and obviously a couple of previous guests we've had on the podcast doing well, and wishing everyone we've had on the podcast good luck in their season this year. But captains, Jack, I'm not sure about you, but I was a captain back in my my playing days as a kid. Not that we won much, but I think captains is a hidden part of the game that sometimes we don't realise the true importance of them. Um, and when we discussed about doing this episode around captains, there's a book I read years ago called The Captain's Class, and there's a quote in it that I'm going to read to you, and I'll read to the audience, and I think it's definitely going to set us up to really start this discussion. So Sam Walker, the author, has said here, it's the notion that the most crucial ingredient in a team that achieves and sustains historic greatness is the character of the player who leads it. And for me, the key word in there is that character. So I think as we go through different captains, yes, it might be good players against average players, but we're not really looking at that, are we? It's looking at characters and what they bring to the table.
Yeah, so that summed you up in a quote there, is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
I think ultimately they normally come into 2 categories, right? Those that lead by example with what they're putting out on the field, and those that are the more vocal kind of instructors, if you like. I think most captains get categorized into those 2, as well as the people that kind of just really represent the club and the city that they're representing, whether it's because it's their boyhood club or just because they've been there a long time. I think that representation is big for the fans as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're right in terms of there's definitely different ways to lead a team, right? And some of the players that we're going to talk about have led in all different styles. I mean, obviously you got from one end of the spectrum, you got Roy Keane in terms of that hard knock attitude, all the way down to, I don't know, let's say a Gundogan who's probably more of a quiet leader, perhaps. So I think there's different ways of doing it. But maybe a question for you: what do you see? What is the attributes you see a captain needs to have?
I don't. I think the best captains are well rounded in the fact that ultimately they're leading by example. You know, they are usually one of the better players on the field, but more so they're the kind of player that is going to do that extra sprint. Maybe sometimes it's not even necessary, but they know it'll get the fans going. And in terms of their work rate and commitment on the field and challenges on the field, they're going to lead the way in that sense. And then having the ability to not necessarily shout and scream, but be able to lay the law down and demand more from their teammates, but knowing when to use that, I think. I think sometimes there's a few captains around that almost get too involved in that, and they spend more time focused on shouting and screaming and having a go at people. And I don't think it's in a way that actually brings the best out of players. So I think having the ability to demand more from their teammates, but knowing when to do that and not overusing that as well.
Yeah, I feel like we grew up in an era, and even before the era that we kind of watched it, a captain was kind of symbolized into one character, and that was the one that would shout a lot, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's evolved over time, and it's not always the best player, but it might be the player that, I mean, of course, we're not seeing behind the scenes in the dressing room, but it could be somebody who is just good at putting the team together. So I think when
But
it comes,
I think another big part of it too is that connection with the fans. I think when the fans feel that they have someone who represents them on the field leading the way and they feel connected to them, I think that's a big, big part as well. I think if you look at the best captains, they're always, and it doesn't mean they go over to the fans and give them a hug and sign autographs. It just means that the fans feel that that person's out on the field representing and demanding what they also want to see demanded.
so would you say for a captain to potentially be successful, if you're talking there about the relationship, does that captain almost need to have a be from that area of where that team is? You look at somebody like a Gary Neville, for example. He's a Manc. Did the Man United fans take to him being captain more because he was a local lad?
I think it, I think it can make the transition easier. I don't think it's necessary. Not every captain is even from that country, never mind from that city. So I don't think it's necessary. I think it's more just if the fans have that attachment to them, I do think it's important, and I think that's just a bit easier if you're from that place or from that club. Um, I mean, do you want me to read you out the captains for every team in the Premier League this year? You tell me which one you think's the best captain.
Yeah, go on.
So Man City have Kyle Walker, Man United Bruno Fernandes, Liverpool Van Dijk, Chelsea Reece James, Tottenham Hotspur is Son, Arsenal Odegaard, Newcastle Bruno Guimaraes, Brighton Lewis Dunk, West Ham Jared Bowen, Leicester Jamie Vardy, Ipswich Sam Morsy, Aston Villa John McGinn, Fulham Tom Kearney, Bournemouth Neto, Southampton Jack Stevens, Wolves Mario Lemina. Palace is Joel Ward, Everton is Seamus Coleman, Brentford is Christian Norgard, and Nottingham Forest is Ryan Yates.
So a complete range of not only players in there from position wise, but I think in terms of characters, in terms of that quote that I read out, a few that kind of I just wrote some notes down here, like the one that springs to mind in there, like Jamie Vardy, for example. You know that when the tough gets going, he's going to be down in the trenches trying to fight back, and he's going to give it his all. Um, Maybe not Leicester's best player, but it's probably a player that you're willing to get behind, right?
Yeah, and I think with his experience, what he's done, it's easier for him to kind of demand from the others. And also the way he had to kind of fight for his career from the lower leagues and move himself up. The other one to think about is like a Tottenham Son. Definitely doesn't seem like the kind of guy that's going to turn around and yell at someone for making a mistake. But everything you hear about him is the way he carries himself, how professional he is, but also how he interacts with everyone at the club. I think that's a good example of someone who leads by example, but maybe isn't the most vocal.
Yeah, and I think Son had a tough job, obviously, taking it over from Harry Kane, who obviously the Spurs fans adored. But I think the same admiration from the fans, I think they have for Son. And like you said, he's probably the prime example of maybe that quiet leader. But I mean, I've through social media, you've seen clips of him with the fans, like coming over and speaking to them, and he just seems like he's one of those that leads by example in terms of just probably you can expect him to be disciplined, professional at the training ground, first one there, last one to leave. But then you've got somebody like Son who might be quiet, but then on the other side of it, somebody like Bruno Fernandes. I don't think personally I could play for a captain in Bruno who just seems to moan at every little single part. To me, that doesn't seem productive.
Yeah, he wouldn't be my choice of captain, and I think yeah, I'm surprised that each year he does get given it. I think maybe I don't know if people are afraid of the big decision to take it off him. Um, but just look, I think just go let him be a good player. Like you said, I don't think the way he interacts with teammates is great. Um, Obviously, we're seeing it from far afield and not seeing what goes on behind doors. But from what you see during the games, doesn't seem to be. It wouldn't be my choice of captain, let's say.
Yeah, and that's an interesting part as well, because obviously Bruno came in and took it over from Harry Maguire. Obviously, Harry Maguire is still there. I wonder how that dynamic almost changes from a player within the change room. Normally, if they're losing their captaincy, it's because of maybe a transfer or they're under their contract or retirement. I wonder what that dynamic was like when Maguire lost the captaincy to Bruno in terms of Bruno's style of leadership.
Yeah, I think in terms of Maguire, I think the writing was on the wall a little bit. I think definitely different leaders. Uh, yeah, I think you've seen people not react well to Fernandez's style of captaincy, but he's still got it. So obviously, people are seeing different things to us. I think an interesting one is Jared Bowen at West Ham. Still he hasn't. He's obviously been there a few seasons, but not that long a period of time. Um, I think that is an example of someone who seems to have a bit of an attachment with the crowd and the fans and that relationship, and maybe that's why he's kind of he's not from the area, I don't think, but still got that attachment with the fans through for different reasons, and being given the captaincy there.
I reckon it's definitely because he's dating Danny Dyer's daughter. Danny Dyer's had a word with the board and say, yeah, get my son-in-law in as captain.
Yeah, maybe.
Um,
But yeah,
but an
so I think
interesting.
the safe choice there out of those captains would be, say, Van Dijk or a Kyle Walker as the top captains. Maybe even a Lewis Dunk at Brighton, because he's done good things with them for a long period.
Well, here's another one for you. Like at Chelsea, Reece James, he can't keep himself fit. So if he's going to continue to be captain, surely he's got to be playing. Surely you can't have a captain in your team who's not playing in games.
Yeah, well, it's almost like that club captain role, I guess, in the end. And then I think too, with the amount of players Chelsea have got, for anyone to play consistently in the team is a task.
Yeah, and like you look at Chelsea, like obviously when Reece James was injured, Conor Gallagher filled in for that, but now he's gone. I think Enzo Fernandez picked it up. Um, I don't know. I do think that for teams to be successful, you look at the leaders behind them, and if you take out the managers, like for example, Man City, take away Pep Guardiola, you look at the captains he's had at the helm in terms of company, Kyle Walker, and then the year before last, like Gundogan, like he's obviously brought him back for a reason, and to bring him back in, not just because of his playing ability. Kyle Walker hasn't started games this year. It's been Rico Lewis. Obviously, you've got KDB there, but is Gundogan coming back in to almost be that leader of the team and go make sure they win the next title?
I think the challenging thing too is when we talk about these players, did their team has their team been successful because they've been good captains, or has that helped them be successful, or is it that we see them as very good captains because they've been successful because they've played in great teams? If you take one of those guys out and they're captain of, say, Bournemouth, do we still see them as a great captain, or is it ultimately because they're there picking up the trophy at the end of the season that we see them in a different light?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair shout actually, because like take for example, like your team in Huddersfield. Obviously, a player from there isn't getting say into this list because of maybe their short spell in the Premier League. But who was your captain in your first year? Was it Aaron? Was it Aaron Moy or was it somebody else? Jonathan
Well, right.
Hodge.
Right now, so Jonathan Hogg's the captain at the minute, and he's been at Huddersfield for a long period of time. And I think he has that because people see the commitment on the field. He has that attachment with the fans, and I think he leads by example and has the vocal aspect. So I would say he is a very good captain. But obviously, ability wise, he's not in the Premier League.
So
Um,
like you take somebody like him and you take like players that we've already mentioned, your Nevilles, your Vidic companies and people like that, just because they haven't won. So then we're saying the criteria, just because you haven't maybe won the Premier League, does that mean you don't get put into the idea of being one of the best captains in Premier League history?
and I think that's just well, yeah, because I mean, I think because it depends. Are we judging people purely on their ability as a captain? Are we judging people as their ability as a footballer who is also and a captain?
So then, yeah, I mean, good point. When we're now looking at I've got a list of players here. If we're looking at creating our top three captains of all time, what should be the criteria to get into that in your aspect?
Well, I think as we talked about leading by example on the field, I think big moments, big moments that maybe defined a season or where they've stepped up in a big way in a big moment. I think uh, being able to demand from other players and using it at the right time. And I do think how the success of the team does play into it. Of course, it does.
I'm just looking here. So I think when you talk about big moments, I think a lot of captains out there have probably had their big moments. But like for example, for me, Steven Gerrard, captain Liverpool for so many years,
Hmm.
but didn't win the Premier League. And if you're really going to boil it down to it, made that mistake in a crucial moment that could have won Liverpool the league in terms of when he slipped. So yes, at times Gerrard scoring in the FA Cup final, scoring against Olympiacos Champions League, and big moments. But was it the big moments within Premier League? And because he hasn't won the Premier League, I know we just said it doesn't define it, but for me, Gerrard is almost that grey area of maybe not making it into the top three.
Yeah, top three is going to be tough, but certainly, say if we did a top 10, he's definitely in there. Maybe even top five because he kind of embodies the city. He has that relationship with the fans. I think in terms of work rate, commitment on the field, you can't. He's second to none. He's so fit as well. The amount of ground he would cover. So in terms of leading by example, he ticks that box. And I do think at times he had that bit of nastiness to demand and have a go at people when it was needed. Um, yeah, like I said, there are big moments for him,
But
scoring
then,
in FA Cup finals, Champions Leagues. But that slip up is kind of the red mark against his name, I guess.
yeah, because I mean, you look at Liverpool, you would compare him to, say, a Jordan Henderson. Jordan Henderson had his hands on the trophy and has lifted the trophy. So does that push Henderson in front of Steven Gerrard when you're talking about Liverpool captains?
No, I don't think so. I think just in terms of the amount of period of time he did it and everything, yeah. Maybe I'd be interested to ask a Liverpool fan, but I'm pretty sure they would say Gerrard is the better captain in terms of their Premier League era, the best captain they've had.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough one. I think the criteria to find what is the best captain is tough, and it's almost, I mean, this is what the game is, a game of opinions. I think it's down to, as you said, big moments, demanding of players. We said about the attachment to fans, but I also think in terms of like you can tell players that are willing to lead on the front line and put their bodies in the line. And for me, Roy Keane is one of the best. And it's almost, you've seen it before, and we've seen clips where when David Beckham obviously went through that scrutiny after the '98 World Cup, when fans and players were targeting him, anytime a player left anything on Beckham, the next time that player got the ball, Roy Keane was going straight through them. Is that right or wrong? That's up for you to debate, but it's showing that he's got every single player's back.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with Roy Keane is when people, if someone mentions his name and to talk about him, the first thing people do is talk about him as a captain. I think he's probably the only player I can think of where, before they actually start talking about how good of a footballer he was, that their first thought is like lead, they go into the captain side of things, which is interesting. I would say, and certainly in the modern game, some of the stuff he did, he won't be getting away with. Did he get too many red cards and actually leave his team down to 10 men in tough situations? You could say that's maybe a red flag against his name, but yeah, I think he's the only one I can really think of. Maybe Vieira, or maybe Tony Adams, but I think he's probably the only one I can think of where, even though he was very, very good, he's almost kind of underrated as a player because of people talking about his captaincy.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like Patrick Vieira, like when I was doing a little bit of research on this, like you almost think Patrick Vieira won more titles than he actually did, just because of that rivalry with United and Arsenal. But only having won the one title, yes, it was a fantastic season for Arsenal. And Vieira, I feel like in terms of when you look at a captaincy, was similar and had similar traits to a Roy Keane. That if any player was struggling for Arsenal, Vieira would be there to back him up. But I think if you were narrowing it down between them two in certain traits, big moments, I think maybe Roy Keane maybe edges it. I mean, you look at the Champions League in the semi-final
Yeah.
when he obviously he knows he's not going to be playing the final, but he still pulls it through. I know we're talking Premier League, but still you're talking big moments overall. But then also you look at Roy Keane. he's a treble-winning captain. There's not many of those about.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think for those reasons you mentioned there, that Juventus performance was one that I think kind of stands out as a captain's performance. I would definitely have him in the top three. You've already mentioned we've mentioned a few on my kind of shortlist, if you like. Keane, Vieira, Gerrard was on my list. I just mentioned Tony Adams, which I think he's definitely up there. Maybe he's a bit like Keane, and you talk about him being a great defender, but also captaincy wise, it comes to mind straight away. Some others I had on there: John Terry, Vincent Kompany, and Azpilicueta. I think kind of goes under the radar a little bit as someone who picked up multiple European trophies for Chelsea, and led some very good Chelsea teams.
So I'm 100% agreeing with one of those in there. John Terry, for me, I think goes down in history as one of the best captains. Just kind of how he played the game. He wore his heart on his sleeve. I mean, not only was he captain for Chelsea, but also captain at times for England too. I think it's an interesting one too. The players that we've all mentioned typically are either centre midfield players or centre backs. So then, for you, would you suggest that to be the ideal captain, the best captain in Premier League history, we have to look at those positions, or you think it can come out of it?
No, I don't think so. I think that's kind of like almost like an old-fashioned way of looking at things, that the centre back or the centre mid has to be the captain, because they're normally in kind of in the early days of the Premier League, that was kind of the bigger, tougher players maybe were down the spine of the team, and that's what people thought the captain was about, being that kind of tough guy, being the leader, being the aggressor, and backing people up. Whereas I don't think that's necessarily the situation these days in the Premier League.
So what's your thoughts then on a goalkeeper being a captain? Because for me, I have my own thoughts on it, but what's your thoughts on a goalkeeper being a captain?
I think people's first negative reaction is, well, it needs to be someone who can communicate across the whole field. But realistically, we're in the Premier League. Every player out there is communicating across the whole field. So I'm not necessarily sure how big of a deal that is. I think it is. I think it definitely comes into the calculation, but I think ultimately you've got other players out there who are communicating as well. I think with the new refereeing rule about only the captains can communicate with the referee, I think that's an interesting one. Whether the goalkeeper, if the goalkeeper's captain, I don't know if they nominate someone else instead, because obviously you're not expecting the goalkeeper to come in out every time to speak to the ref. But
yeah, well, that's the one point I was going to mention on is, like, obviously with the new rules now where they're trying to introduce only the captain can talk, even though that really hasn't, I don't think, been happening too much. But I think for me, my reason why a goalkeeper can't be captain, maybe yes, club captain, but in terms of on that field captain number one, for me, like if the ball's on the complete other side of the field, they're not going to have that impact. You're talking there that you're saying that players at the professional level are going to be talking, but if you're playing in front of 20 to 60,000 fans, you shouting at the back isn't going to be heard if the ball's up at a corner, or if there's a scrap going on in the corner of the field. The goalkeeper isn't expected to run up there. For me, you've got to have. I agree with your point in terms of
that's my point,
any
right?
position
Is
except the goalie.
he doesn't need to be. It doesn't matter if he's shouting from 70 yards away, because you've got people around the ball that are talking and communicating. And I think the whole thing about having a scrap and look, it's one of the things that winds me up most in the Premier League is people kind of winding each other up, knowing that no one's really going to do anything to them, right? Because ultimately they're going to have a long-term ban. So people acting tough and wanting to say this and say that and pushing the shove because they know that the guy that's a foot taller and 50 pounds heavier than them isn't going to lay a hand on them because they don't want to have a 10-game ban or something silly. So yeah, I just think in the modern game it's fine. Would it be my choice? Not necessarily, but I think it's fine.
All right.
Yeah,
So
Hugo Lloris was captain at Tottenham for a while, wasn't he? I thought he did a good job.
yeah, for
I
all that
think
they won.
sure, but I mean, yeah, like I said, it wouldn't be necessarily my choice, but I think it's okay.
So then going back to a couple of the players that you
Well,
mentioned,
one of your boys, Peter Schmeichel, would captain. I think he captained the team for a whole year when Roy Keane was out injured.
Yeah, and I think he almost was a similar character to Roy Keane in terms of an aggressive player, in terms of how he came across. But I think really the only two that I can think of in terms of captains that truly maybe made a difference as a goalkeeper would be Oliver Kahn at times
Yeah.
and Peter Schmeichel. But you look at those characters, I think they were like aggressive natured players that would just constantly shout and demand a lot, which I think was fine back in the 90s. But now a captain for me has to be able to be around and constantly communicate. And obviously that point you made with the referees. Um,
Well, do you
but I
think captains are less important, say, in the Premier League now than they were, say, in the 90s? Do you
see,
think their
I would say
roles
the
become
opposite
less?
almost. Because the reason I would say the opposite is because of this rule of where if it is now the only the captain can talk, and if they really get like strong on the punishment of that, then I think yes, maybe 5, 6 years ago, I think your argument's right, but I think now captains are going to be even more crucial. So
But do you think their impact? Do you think they have the same? Does that one individual have the same impact on their team? Forget about the ref that they did in the 90s compared to the modern game.
yeah, I think it would be interesting to see if there's a statistic out there, like obviously about average age, like if the average age of a captain back in the 90s was maybe on the older side, and now it's more of the younger side. Like some of those captains that you mentioned were younger, and maybe, I mean, you look at John Terry. When Jose Mourinho in 2004 made John Terry the captain, he was fairly young, and John Terry goes and wins the Premier League in the first year as captain. I think it. I think also it has to have you have to have that relationship with your manager, right? Like I've heard numerous podcasts and stories from ex-pros saying if players were unhappy, it would be the captain going to the manager to almost be that middle person. Like if the players needed an extra day off or they thought it was maybe beneficial to go away for a couple of days, lads golf trip, whatever it might be, it was the captain that would approach the manager. And I think what better relationship example out there between John Terry and Jose Mourinho? Their relationship was clear that they both respected one another and they would almost die for each other. And that's, I think, why what made Chelsea very successful during that period.
It's interesting too about I think if you talk to John Terry about captaincy, he would kind of big it up and talk about like how important it is and everything he did and all this kind of stuff. You see interviews with Roy Keane about captaincy and he's like, I mean, it made no difference. All it meant is I had to sort out the tickets
Yeah.
for the other players in the team who needed tickets for family members and stuff and things like that. So it's interesting, like the different perspectives, because I think some people would be the same player whether they get the armband or not. For example, Peter Schmeichel, when it went back to Roy Keane, he was still the same Peter Schmeichel, shouting, yelling, being aggressive, demanding off his back line. John Terry with the captain's armband compared to John Terry, if he didn't have it, is he the same player or does it give him an extra 10%? Does that responsibility give him an extra 10%?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there. And again, like we said, it's opinions, right? Like, I don't know, you look at John Terry and Frank Lampard as a duo because there was times obviously Frank Lampard had to step in. Um, And that hits on your point that you said, is it now in a modern game that like there's more than just one captain? Yes, officially there's not, but in terms of everyone being leaders on the field, because like for example, my team in United are a team lacking leaders, right?
Mm.
So even as a captain Bruno, you need other players around you to be leaders. Um, so I think that you've got to find a variety of personalities on a team to be successful. And I
But
think you look,
I think you've kind of hit the nail on that. I think that is the answer in the sense of the best captains have other leaders in the team, so it's not just them. Roy Keane would have had a number of different people he could rely on, whether it in different stages at Man United, whether it be Schmeichel, whether it be all those other guys that he played with. Tony Adams. If you think about the Arsenal teams that Tony Adams played in, he had a number of leaders in there. Same with Vieira. He had um, people around him that if he was quiet, someone else would be doing the shouting.
yeah.
So
And even in
he's
modern times, right, with City, you look at their squad, there's probably 3 or 4 captains within the City squad that could step up.
Yeah, you got to think John Terry, yeah, Lampard, but you've also got then Didier Drogba up front, who would probably be the captain at any other club if he'd have been there. So
Well, you said an interesting one as well in terms of Azpilicueta. Why him?
I think he probably goes under the radar a little bit. Obviously, won multiple European trophies at Chelsea and cups at Chelsea. And I think at a time where at a club such as Chelsea, where seems to be so many changes going on all the time, whether it be the manager, whether it be the players, that him being that consistent factor for a long period of time, he just seemed to have control of the situation and control of the team. And I think with when you see him not there, he just seems to have. I think for me, he had ultimately a lot of egos, a lot of good players in that team, but he had control of the players. They would listen to him, and I think um, that was a big part of their success. Just having that one person who, a bit like you says, has the relationship with the players, has the relationship and respect of the players, has the relationship and respect of the fans, has the relationship and respect of the managers. If you have all three of those things together, then you can be the captain of the team, I think.
Do you think as well that like obviously when he's captain, if he's coming into that team having already won something from other clubs, or if he's in the first season winning the Champions League, surely that buys him more credit for the next year, and he can almost demand more of his players as captain because of what he's won in the past.
Yeah, but you got to remember, like, he was at Chelsea a while before he was captain. He kind of, I don't think he necessarily was in the starting 11 at first. He kind of had to work his way into the team. When he initially went as a left back and Ashley Cole was there, I think. So he was there for a long period and knew the club inside out, I think, by the time he was captain as well.
Well, two other captains that we haven't really mentioned much, and this is almost which captain is better in terms of these aspects, but in terms of Battle of the Minnows, in terms of teams that aren't expected to win the league, in terms of Leicester and Wes Morgan being the captain there, and then obviously Blackburn in the early 90s. I know obviously Blackburn spent a bit of money at that time, but I don't think they weren't nailed on to go and win it, and you had Tim Sherwood there. So for me, does a good captain, a bit like what you said about Jonathan Hogg at Huddersfield, does sometimes the good captains fall in the shadow because they haven't won all this glamour and this glitz? Like for me, Wes Morgan, in a yes, they had a few talented players in Kante and Danny Drinkwater at the time. Jamie Vardy was on form, but Wes Morgan had to surely maintain that standard throughout the whole season. I'm thinking like the start of the season when they start winning games, you surely got to think that the players there are expecting a drop off at some point. But surely Wes Morgan has made sure the standards have been kept all the way to the last game.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you hear people talk about that or kind of miracle season and start giving credit to Ranieri, actually a lot of people push back on it saying actually it was Wes Morgan who kind of led the way and held things together more so than the manager even. So um, obviously that's from people on the inside. So in that sense, definitely deserves a lot of credit. But I also think longevity comes into it and having success or being yeah, I think it's a good point. I think he was undoubtedly a very good captain at Leicester. Um, and maybe unfairly pushed out of kind of that top three list because of the him winning the league once compared to people who maybe have won multiple pieces of silverware, whether it be Premier League or otherwise.
Yeah, well, you mean you look at like Wes Morgan again, another centre back that we're talking about. Um, does maybe if you are looking at position, is the centre back the best one out there? Because I don't know, maybe because of how their nature of how they play the game potentially.
Yeah. But I think sometimes it's easier for people to pick out a leader when they're a certain style of player as well, right? Someone, because of kind of just the traditional sense of a captain, I think.
So then, if you're thinking, then we're trying to think of who are bronze, silver, gold medalists are for Premier League captains of all time. Which three players, if it was up to you, should we debate in? And don't necessarily give the order, but what three players should be in there in your imagination?
Oof, tough call. Roy Keane, John Terry. I'll go maybe Tony Adams I mean, the other
So,
one we haven't spoken much about, Vincent Company. And obviously he stepped up in a big moment in a big way with one of the goals he scored for one of the title-winning seasons. But certainly Keane, Terry, Adams, Company. Like I say, I like Asbilla quite a lot. I think he's a very good captain.
so I think you've like, for example, Tony Adams. We haven't spoke much about him, and again, another fantastic leader. And I think Ian Wright said in a podcast recently that obviously Tony Adams went through quite a lot of issues off the field, right, in terms of drink issues, gambling issues. And Ian Wright said that if he didn't have those problems, Arsenal probably would have won more. And I think that goes to show the type of person Tony Adams was. To literally, he was dragging sometimes Arsenal through it, having so much to deal with off the field. Because I think Tony Adams is almost similar to your Wes Morgans and your Roy Keanes in terms of those tough captains that, I mean, you can tell as soon as you see them, they look like a leader. Like I would happily have a leader like Tony Adams be a captain in a modern day game now. I just think that's the smart way of doing it. Somebody that's going to really put it out there and have their heart on their sleeve.
Yeah, those ones you mentioned are kind of imposing figures, I guess, for the opposition at times as well. And people that are going to back up their teammates in tough situations. I think I read something about him being the only one to be a winning captain in 3 different decades as well. So I don't know if that's right, but yeah, I mean he played in 2 very different teams too at Arsenal, right? Graham Taylor's team, which was very much focused around being defensively strong, not conceding goals, and they won that way. And then going with underneath Arsene Wenger and the new style and all this new stuff coming in and soccer evolving massively during that time, and him being able to evolve with it while still keeping kind of his more traditional captaincy style, if you like, I think is a big plus for him.
I think one that should be in for a mention of trying to break into the top three. I'm in agreement that John Terry and Roy Keane have got to be in there. We'll obviously
Okay.
debate what order maybe, but like Vincent Company, yes, he had very good players around him, but you can't argue he won 4 Premier League titles, only one short than John Terry, who's the leader as a captain. So does Vincent Company go in there because of what he's won? And I just think Company, and it's showing now in terms of him stepping into the coaching role, and he seemed very smart and switched on. Yes, he didn't have the greatest time in his later part of Burnley career, but I just think Company. There was a few interviews, and he always had his teammates back. He was almost sometimes too honest in interviews, and would almost come out to say, "Yeah, we weren't at our best," and would recognise that. And sometimes you have to appreciate that honesty.
Yeah, I think that's him demanding more of his teammates, and at a time where he had so much talented players around him to kind of keep them not getting ahead of themselves and to demand more from them, I think is a sign of a really good captain. I'd be happy to put him in the top three. Like I said, won multiple titles. Yes, talented players around him, but you got to also say sometimes that makes your job as captain harder, right? Like being able to manage those egos that come with talented players, especially when you've not just got 11 of them, you've got a squad full of them. Um, so yeah, I think a very good nomination for a top three captaincy.
And you talk about big moments. That goal obviously he scores. When he bangs it from like 30 odd yards top corner, which yes, it didn't secure him the title, but it pretty much put him there or thereabouts. So I think when we're talking about this top three, I think if I was to guess right, Company goes in at third spot, and then it's just a case of preference of who's going into first. Is it Roy Keane or John Terry?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Terry, tough one because you threw out that stat there about John Terry winning more Premier League titles than any other uh, captain. Whether that comes down to just being the captain for more years, maybe, but because the thing I keep going back with Roy Keane is that you mention his name and people talk about captaincy, they don't talk, which I think it sometimes is a bit of a shame because
Yeah.
people don't realize how good of a player he was because they talk about that. But on the same note, it also shows just how important he was as a leader and a captain of that team and the impact he had. from that position.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to ask 100 people, name the best ever Premier League captain, I'm thinking at least 60, 70% are saying Roy Keane in there. I think he's definitely, as you said, you think Roy Keane, you think leader, you think captain. I think if you mention John Terry's name, yes, people are going to mention his leadership, but people are going to mention how good of a defender he was more than him being a captain.
Yeah, possibly so.
So I think for me, Roy Keane goes in as number one as the greatest Premier League captain, with John Terry not far behind, but just a little bit behind in terms of captaincy.
Yeah, close. And then with company third, I think, it's very easy to argue that those should be switched around or a different order. But I would agree with that 1, 2, 3.
So all right, I think we know our 1, 2, and 3. You happy with that?
I'm happy with that. I have also been writing down some names for this trivia question too.
I was going to say I'm just making a look at my list, making sure it's all right. I know sometimes I might get fact check a little bit, but no, I think just to obviously repeat that question, 17 players or 17 captains to have won the Premier League. Can you name all 17?
I actually have 17 names written down,
Okay, I've got them wrote
and
down
I
there, so I'll be able to tick them off.
and I think I've got a chance.
Yeah.
Well, I tried to basically go from, the first Premier League season down, and then got about halfway, and then just started writing names down that I think picked up the trophy.
Okay.
Actually, the ones that I'm less sure about were the Man City captains from their winning years. Interestingly, more modern times. But
Okay,
so
give it.
starting off with Tim Sherwood,
Correct.
and then kind of the Man United early captains: Brian Robson,
Correct.
Eric Cantona.
Oh, I didn't know if you would get that one.
I think this is right, but I might be wrong. Steve Bruce.
That is correct. Another banana skin. I didn't know if you would get.
And then we've got a few of the names we've mentioned. So Tony Adams,
Yep.
John Terry,
Yep.
Patrick Vieira,
Yep.
Roy Keane. Oh, I've had a nightmare. I've written John Terry down twice.
Oh.
All right, Nemanja Vidic,
Yep.
Wes Morgan,
Correct.
Vincent Company,
Yep.
Gary Cahill.
Oh, that's the one I didn't know if you'd get. If you'd think maybe Azpilicueta, but all right.
No,
Yep.
I'm pretty sure Azpilicueta was captain after Gary Cahill. Gary Neville.
Yes.
Did I say Gundogan?
Nope. But you can have him. Yep.
Jordan Henderson.
Yep.
I'm going to go Kyle Walker,
Last year,
and I'm missing one.
you are missing one.
Yeah, I'm struggling for that other one. Unless it's
I'll
like
give
De
you.
Bruyne, unless De Bruyne was a captain at Man City a different year.
No, it is Man City though. If you want one last guess, I'll be nice to you.
No, go on.
Fernandinho.
Ah, yeah. All right, yeah. That's an interesting one as well. Fernandinho as a captain. Bit of a yeah, he
But
was maybe a more a quieter captain, wasn't it? I guess from what we saw at least.
fair play to you. 16 out of 17. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, once we started talking, it was easier.
Yeah.
I think we might have mentioned 10 of those names in our
I was going to say
conversation.
we dropped a few clues in there for sure. But no, captains. We'll see which captain will be lifting the Premier League come the end of the season. Whether it's going to be Kyle Walker again, we shall see. But any last words, Jack, on captains?
On captains, I think obviously talking about them, I think the role of the captain's changed a lot in the last kind of 20 years. The style of player and personality that has been given captain. And maybe that's why when we talk about the best captains, if you think about the best captains we talked about there, none of them really still playing, which is interesting too. Maybe because they're less obvious in the modern game compared to the traditional style of captain. So maybe it's more on us to look a bit more in depth at the modern captain and their role.
Exactly, exactly. But with that being said, in the name of Oasis, don't go away, and we'll be back next week. Take care.